country. God bless you all. God bless you all. And I never thought anything like this could happen in America. Never thought it could happen. The only crime that I have committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it.
All right, that was former President Donald Trump speaking today in a primetime address to his supporters and to the American public after a truly unprecedented day today as he was arraigned in New York. Now let's touch a little bit about what this actually means, not just for himself, but also for the 2024 presidential race. You have a lot of people who are considering running. You have some who have already declared their candidacies for the 2024 race. And a lot of people at first were concerned that this could potentially, help Donald Trump. And his campaign did raise some additional funding. They did get quite a large sum of additional donations after news of this indictment first broke. Now his campaign selling T-shirts, etc., as it relates to him being arraigned today. Now, of course, he was in New York today, but he is now back in West Palm Beach, where, as you saw there, he gave an address to his supporters and to the American public. Now, a lot of perspectives, I touched on this last night on the program, a lot of perspectives have been coming in on the issue of this Trump indictment. The first time, the big thing here, a lot of historical context, the first time that a former president of the United States has ever been indicted in American history. Now, you also have a lot of commentary on Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. The former President Donald Trump posted to his social media platform, Truth Social, criticizing Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. There you see it on your screen, what actually was said by Donald Trump, the former president, on his social media platform, Truth Social. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg also gave a press conference just shortly after all of the events of today, Donald Trump actually being arraigned, took place. There you see him there, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, as he was speaking to the press earlier today. A lot of different perspectives on this issue, a lot of developments that we continue to track. And obviously the important context here is providing a platform to those perspectives. And that is exactly what we are going to do once again tonight. Documentary on the Discovery Channel entitled Unprecedented, which looks specifically at, what took place with the former president, some of his administration, but specifically with the 2020 election campaign, looking at the lie that his campaign was talking about, that the election was in some way stolen. It had unprecedented access, as the name suggests, to the entire Trump family, including with the president, Donald Trump. And now a lot of people are turning to the documentary, not only watching the documentary, but going to some of the people who were behind the documentary to, really find out what was behind having such exclusive access with the former president, what it was like, and what we can now, I guess, know from that as we're applying it to the most recent indictment. So joining me now is the director of that documentary, Alex Holder. Thanks so much for making the time. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Lovely to be with you.
Let's just start out with what it was ultimately like. I mean, we can get into the indictment in a little moment here, but having such exclusive access, not just to the former president, Donald Trump, which I believe I read somewhere was the last interview that he gave as president, but also with a bunch of members of his family, with the former Vice President Mike Pence. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So, I mean, it was pretty extraordinary to have the access that we had. And I think we didn't take it for granted. So the whole process of making the documentary was, constantly trying to, see it as being, this is probably the last interview we're going to have with this particular person, or the last bit of access we're going to have. And then we kept getting the access more and more as time went on, which was pretty amazing. And some of the most amazing experiences was traveling on Air Force One with President Trump, and going on the campaign rally with his kids, and having this sort of really up close and personal access to the president and the children throughout the campaign. And then obviously after the events of January 6th, to then maintain that access and do follow-up interviews with both Trump on 2 occasions, and then with his daughter and son-in-law Jared Kushner, and again with Eric. So it was pretty amazing.
And when you look at, I mean, a lot of people you'll hear talking about, like as an example, for example, most recently you had Fox News hosts with text messages revealed, basically going back and forth, and what it kind of revealed is what they were saying on air wasn't necessarily what they actually believed. And I guess a lot of people are wondering, with such exclusive access to the former president, as an example, how different was he, privately, kind of behind the scenes, versus, when he's out at a campaign rally giving a speech, or how most people would publicly see him?
For all intents and purposes, what you see is what you get. So there's not much of a difference between what he's like on TV and in real life. There are a few bits and pieces that are interesting. So, for example, he's known to not be a big fan of touching people, right? He's a bit of a germaphobe, but he does this thing where he sort of gets very close to you and gets into sort of your own personal space. It's kind of a technique that bullies use. So he gets very close to you and he sort of whispers in your ear, and as if you're like obviously going to agree with him. So he'll come up to me and he'll sort of like, push my shoulder, he'll whack me on the back, and he'll be like, "Oh, you agree that the election was stolen, right?" That kind of personality or that character trait. And you're sort of like, and he's a big guy, right? Like he's very, very tall, he's very broad, he looks like a American football player. And so it's a bit imposing when he's like that close and getting very intimate, let's say. And then you're sort of like, yeah, well, I don't really agree with you. The election being stolen. And he's like, oh, well, you're just one of them, etc. So, but there is one thing that I noticed, which is that he does put on this facade in a sense of trying to look like he's in charge and all powerful, right? So he doesn't believe in showing any sort of weakness or emotion. So before every interview, he always would sort of sit himself up in a seat, and he'll like do this weird thing with his face, and then it's as if he's like sort of putting on this mask before he starts an interview. And I think it's just he lives in this very old-fashioned world of you need to constantly show power and strength and never allow your emotions to come out. And off camera, there were a few glimpses where you did see some of that, and even on camera, as you saw in the documentary, when he moves a water glass around, or when he's looking at himself in the camera and seeing how he looks. He comments that at one point he looked too orange. So there are moments of I guess of humanity, I guess, in a sense. But overall, he does really act the same way on TV as he does in real life.
And was there anything in particular that, when you're looking at the situation now with his indictment and with everything that's currently happening, I mean, is there anything in particular that, like, thinking back, back when you were, in the process of filming the documentary, was there anything that kind of stood out that now you're thinking about as all of this is unfolding?
Well, there was one thing that's interesting, which is that we didn't include it in the documentary because it wasn't really relevant at the time. But he was talking, Trump always talks about grievances and how everyone's against him, right? And so he was giving these examples whilst we were talking about that, about how, he calls it, impeachment hoax 1, impeachment hoax 2, and then the Russia investigation. And then he brings up New York, which was really interesting because that interview took place about 2 years ago. So he was already concerned about the New York investigation back in Bedminster 2 years ago, which was really interesting. So clearly it was something that was on his mind back then. So now obviously it makes sense, but back then it was just another one of the things that he was embroiled in.
And over the course of the day, I've been, looking at the reaction from his various children as to what's happening. I mean, specifically, Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr. seem to take this, always are in defense of their, father, of the former president, as they're kind of defending him as he's in that capacity. I mean, what was it like that as well when you were doing the various interviews with them? I mean, I would sense that it was, but I guess to what extent?
Absolutely. I mean, what's interesting is Ivanka's actually been pretty quiet with respect to what's going on today. But back when I was with them, Dad was the number one person to defend at all costs, and Eric and Don would consistently, articulate their father's position, and Ivanka as well. And in fact, Ivanka got, she spoke to me about a week or so after the Attorney General had made his comments about the fact that there was no election fraud whatsoever. And when she was speaking about the election, she supported her father's position that that he should continue fighting for every vote. When she was interviewed by the January 6th committee, she actually told them that she had accepted the Attorney General's position about a week before she had spoken to me, which clearly didn't make any sense. There was different, so she had this conflicting position. But with me, it wasn't surprising because she always maintained whatever her father had said throughout at least my time of getting to know them.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Documentary filmmaker behind the unprecedented movie series on Discovery, Alex Holder. Thanks so much for making the time. Great chatting.
A pleasure. Really nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. Let's discuss some of the latest on this front with Christine Todd Whitman. She is the co-founder of the Forward Party and also the former governor of New Jersey. Thanks so much for making the time.
My pleasure. Good to be with you, Wyatt.
I guess I just want to start out with what you make of the news of this Trump indictment. Obviously, the president, the former president, had his day in court today. What do you make of it all?
Well, I mean, it sends a strong message that no one's above the law, past, present, or future presidents included. And how strong this case is will maybe be seen. We haven't seen all of the counts, but all of the language behind the 35 counts on the indictment. But we'll know more and just how serious they are. And of course, there are these other cases that are still pending that some might say are more serious than this. But again, we don't know until we've seen the full indictment. But, it should reaffirm our belief in the rule of law and that it's important, and we'll let it play out. But it's certainly going to incite a lot of his supporters because he's doing his best to ensure that. He'll speak tonight to it, and I expect that to be another rallying cry of how terrible this is and how he's being prosecuted and persecuted. But again, to my mind, it is really the law working the way it should, that nobody is above it, and we have to appreciate that.
And I guess I'm wondering, too, what you make of it in the respect of what it means for the 2024 race. The fact that traditionally it's always been a battle of Democrats and Republicans. You are a part of this new forward movement along with Andrew Yang. So when looking at the place as to where the Forward Party can kind of fit into it, I mean, the ongoing battle between Democrats and Republicans, you have Republicans who are, claiming it's weaponization, and then you have Democrats who are almost celebrating it. I mean, many would suggest that neither of those two things are very good for the democratic process. I guess what do you make of it on that front?
Well, I think you're absolutely right about that. This is nothing to celebrate. I mean, this is the former president of the United States. This is serious stuff, and the other cases are equally serious, if not more so. So we should be concerned about the behavior. We should be concerned about the implications and what it does with a former president being arrested like this. It's not in anybody's best interest to have this happen, but it is good that it is happening in the sense that it reaffirms the rule of law. When I'm saying it's not good and it's not in anybody's interest, it's just sad for the country that we have to have this happen. But we do have to have it happen because there's enough there obviously in the minds of the prosecutors on all these cases, and certainly we know on the others there's a lot there. Forward is not focused on the presidential election. There are 500,000 elective offices across the United States, and in any given year, fully 70% of those are not contested. And so what we're doing is trying to break the duopoly of the two parties and start and build, just like building a house, you have to have a good foundation. So we're really starting to focus on those offices that are closest to the people, the local offices, the countywide offices, the statewide offices, which are the ones where you very often don't have contested races, thinking everyone should have a choice. And we want to see the political process changed. We want to give people more opportunity to pick different candidates at the primaries, and that's why we support ranked choice voting and open primaries. There is another group, No Labels, that is focused on the 2024 presidential election, but we at Forward will not have a forward party candidate. Our people can support candidates for the presidency and for Senate and the House, that's fine. Work for them, do whatever, but we as a party will not have that. We're concentrating on getting on the ballot in states across the country, 23 by the end of this year, and all of them by 2024, 2025, because we're in it for the long haul.
And I guess when, you mentioned that this shouldn't be celebrated, there are many people, though, who say that it shouldn't necessarily be celebrated, obviously, that the former president has been indicted. Some people are happy, though, to see that there are repercussions for some of the past things that the former president has done. Moving forward, though, I guess, how do we avoid, theater moments, so to speak? How do we ensure that, the former president doesn't just come to New York as he did today, do what he's doing, and then everyone goes on and kind of forgets about it, and then the purpose of it almost kind of fades away, so to speak?
Oh, I don't think the prosecutors are going to forget about it. This case is going to go forward. He's in deep trouble. And he's in deep trouble again, not just with this case, but with Georgia and you have him on tape, on telephone. It was taped. He trying to get the votes changed. You have him on, there's more stuff coming out on his taking of documents, of classified documents, and what he did with them, of those documents. There's a lot. And then, of course, you have the January 6th investigations that are going on. So he's in deep, deep trouble. And he should be. Everybody should be held accountable for their actions. Again, no one's above the rule of law, and they should be held accountable. So this is a process that is going to take us down a road that's going to be a long, twisted one and entirely new for our country. The most important thing is that people recognize that the way to act out or to express your concerns one way or the other about it is not through violence. It is through, you have the right to free speech, you have the right to free assembly, and that's all fine. The things people worry about is violence, and unfortunately the former president's language, I should call him X because he was defeated in a primary, in an election, general election. So he's an ex-president. The ex-president is using language that unfortunately encourages people to do things that they probably shouldn't, or we know they shouldn't.
And so I guess, too, you mentioned January 6th as an example. I guess I want to get your take on the language that we hear from the former president. He posted on his social media platform, Truth Social, on March 18th, calling on his supporters to take America back. A lot of people were quite critical of that, given that that was kind of the same rhetoric, the same tone that the former president was using in the lead up to January 6th, even on January 6th itself. How do we, avoid, recreating, a moment like January 6th? Obviously, people are free to, including the former president, are free to have their beliefs and to share their beliefs with everyone. But how do you do it in, more of a democratic way, so to speak?
Well, fortunately, as we've seen with this, his going to the courthouse in New York, that our law enforcement is prepared for these kinds of things. We have a much better understanding of what to look out for. They are constantly watching the web and watching the dark web to see where these people who want to get together and violently protest, where they are posting things, and they're watching it. So I think law enforcement has a much better understanding of what they have to watch for and what they have to do. So I think we're in a better place. Plus the fact that one of the things you see is because after January 6th, so many of those rioters were held accountable, had to go to court, and many of them are in jail. Others are starting to say, hey, maybe I don't want to do this because there are consequences for my actions, which is why it is so important that we do remember that this is what we're about, holding people accountable to the rule of law. And because we've done that with so many of those January 6th rioters, others now are not nearly as inclined to become violent because they understand there could be real consequences for them.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Christine Todd Whitman, she is the co-founder of the Forward Party, along with Andrew Yang, and also the former governor of New Jersey. Thanks so much for making the time. It's been great chatting.
My pleasure. Good to see you. Take care.
All right, we continue to track the story. We have more analysis for you on this. Joining me now, former Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson, who joins me now. Thank you so much for making the time. I suppose I just want to start it. I guess whenever, this is kind of unprecedented, and so not a lot of people knew what to expect, the fact that a former president was going to be indicted. Talk to me a little bit about the security process for, planning to have adequate security, et cetera, for such an unprecedented event of this nature. And then I suppose kind of a broad question, just generally speaking, this is obviously the first time, as I mentioned, that a former president has ever been indicted. Just speak a little bit about what that means.
We are in uncharted waters. I think it is equally challenging and unprecedented that you have a presidential candidate who is at the moment the front runner for the Republican nomination for president, charged with a crime. As this case progresses and as the campaign progresses, those two timetables are going to become increasingly in conflict. Candidate Trump could have court appearances at the very same time he's out campaigning for president. And what is significant and, in my view, troubling for our democracy is that even though he's been indicted and charged with a crime, his poll numbers, at least among Republicans, don't seem to have dropped at all. So a lot of people, a lot of historians are noting that it's unprecedented that a former president has been charged with a crime. I think it is perhaps even more significant that a leading contender for president has been charged with a crime. What are we going to do with that as a country?
And then just lastly, before we conclude, moving forward, I guess my question would be, how can we ensure that, the former president doesn't just finish off with today and then everybody kind of forgets about this and then things kind of just move forward as if nothing happened? How can we, avoid that, so to speak?
Sure that our press will not let the American people forget about it. And there may be other indictments on the way. He's apparently under investigation in Florida for the events around the classified documents in Mar-a-Lago. He's apparently under investigation for his actions around January 6th, and he's apparently under investigation in Fulton County, Georgia. And so there may be further criminal charges. And so I am sure that we have not seen the last of this.
Let's get some more on some of the latest developments with the Trump indictment with Scotty Nell Hughes. She's a political commentator. Thanks so much for making the time.
Absolutely. I just flew in from New York City and glad that I was able to make it.
Awesome. Let's just start out with the indictment of the former president, specifically some of the reaction that we see from some of the other potential candidates for the 2024 race, some of them who have already declared. One example, I was before this segment looking at Vivek Ramaswamy, who's a businessman who's running for president. He's just one example of some of the candidates who are officially in the race who have spoken out about this indictment. And then you also have Democrats. Democrats aren't necessarily celebrating the fact, so to speak, that, a former president has been indicted. The Democrats that I've been speaking with over the course of the day say that they're mostly happy that there are repercussions for, actions as it relates to what the former president has done. I guess just overall speaking, what do you make of all of this?
That is a great question, because the last thing that anybody wants to talk about if they're running for office is the people they're running against. Because once again, that's controlling the narrative, and you're having to see everyone from Nikki Haley to obviously Ron DeSantis, since he's in Florida. Every other candidate right now is having to talk about Donald Trump, but I guarantee they would actually prefer to be talking about Joe Biden and the Democrats, any other issue in the world besides Donald Trump, and yet they're having to talk about him. They're also having to be careful in how they talk about him. Of course, you don't want to say anything disparagingly against the person you're running against, because I could see as like sour grapes. But in this case, more importantly, you don't want to make angry the Trump base, because let's just say you're able to pull off the nomination over Trump. You're going to need those supporters of Trump, which are still an overwhelmingly large part of the Republican Party, the engaged part of the party right now, are going to have to get behind you. And they don't forget and they don't forgive. So the other candidates right now are definitely having to walk a fine line. They prefer to talk about Joe Biden, and goodness gracious, he is giving them a ton of material to talk about. But instead, they're having to focus right now on this very much misuse of our Justice Department.
And when you look at people like Vivek Ramaswamy, like Nikki Haley, or like, for example, Asia Hutchinson, the former Arkansas governor, said in an interview with Jonathan Karl over the weekend that he's going to be running for president and that he'll be releasing some of the specific details shortly. Why not, go with one of those people as opposed to going with Donald Trump once again after he lost the 2020 election? Why are Republicans, from your perspective, wanting to stay so loyal to Donald Trump?
That's a very, very interesting question, and a dynamic that I think there's going to be studies done, psychological studies done on this for decades from now. And yet we're seeing Donald Trump, who is still the perceived leader of the party because he was the highest person or the highest powerful person that we've had, and he's able to maintain it. And it all comes down to this. Donald Trump, as he showed in Waco just a few days ago, can still draw the crowd. He can still get the masses out. He can still engage people. His tweets cause all sorts of attention. He controls the media narrative. I mean, Nikki Haley yesterday was down on the border, and she was actually trying her best to get the attention on her being at the border, because that's something Joe Biden really hasn't done himself and walked it. And yet she could not make it 3 steps without somebody asking her a question about Donald Trump. So this is the reason why Donald Trump still has so much power, and people think, especially in the Republican Party, that he is going to be the best chance of getting as many people out to vote, engaged enough, excited enough to go vote in 2024, is because he's the only one. He's the only one being able to pull it off right now.
So I guess I want to pick up on that a little bit. I mean, a lot of people were concerned going into today that Donald Trump would have been able to use this as kind of a publicity moment to, take what happens. And a lot of Democrats were saying that they were nervous that he would make it out as if he was the victim of the establishment and a lot of stuff that, people had some concerns about. How, from your perspective, can people like Nikki Haley and some of the other candidates who have declared, or some of the people who we are expecting to potentially declare in the coming months, how can they still get enough attention with someone like Donald Trump in the race who, he was the president, his communication strategy, seems to be on par with wanting to get, the most attention out of any of the candidates?
Well, that's the thing. I don't think they can. And maybe Karl Rove is coming up with some genius plan to try to get whichever candidate he signs on with. But the reality of it is, it's not going to be any candidate. It's going to be either Donald Trump himself or outside effects that give any of these other candidates a chance to run. The second person who has the best chances is Ron DeSantis. I even think Ron DeSantis is looking at the events of the past few weeks, and him being a former military man, someone that likes things to be in order, does not handle drama too well. He's not an entertainer. In fact, he's probably the exact opposite of an entertainer. And looking at this going, maybe I just don't want to get involved in all of this at this point. You know, you've got to have a not only a thick skin, but you just have to be just tireless in your pursuit, because you'll never get a day of rest running against Donald Trump. There's always going to be a candidate like Donald Trump. And then luckily, I guess for everyone else, there's only one Donald Trump, only one person can be him. It doesn't matter whether it's negative or positive. He is always able to come out on top. That's why they called him Teflon Don. In the 2016 election, he's always able to take what looks to be a negative and make it a positive. And a lot of this comes from the fact that he's used since almost day one the same forces that are coming against him in all of these cases. Whether we're talking about in this case is obviously corrupt district attorneys, local judges. Then you're looking down in Georgia, you're looking at election fraud, you're looking in Florida, secret documents that were potentially taken. Every single charge against Donald Trump falls into one of his main talking points that he's been talking about for the last 8 years of corruption within the federal government. So it just, if anything, even gives him a better chance to prove that this is why these folks are coming against him. Not only is because he's ready to expose them, but more importantly, it proves the fact that there is some corruption in some of these cases. And when they finally released the indictment today against Donald Trump, it only made him look better, because even the Democrats right now, the extreme political pundits who are still crying because they were never able to get their shot of him in cuffs or the actual mugshot because he didn't take one, they are going, even this is a nothing burger. This is nothing like the 34th. I think they were expecting, you know, all these crimes, and even they are having a hard time trying to spin this to where this is anything but an obvious political plot to try to keep somebody off the campaign trail. And it's only furthered by a judge who has strong ties to the Democratic Party, not only his daughter who worked in the Biden campaign and Kamala Harris's campaign, but he himself, the judge, has made donations to Democrat candidates all along. Not any Republicans are showing up on his FEC filings either. So this is just showing the corruption that's happening. And everybody can look at Donald Trump if they've ever had to run in with an IRS agent, if they've ever had to run in that they felt like that they were unfairly targeted. They can relate to this and say, okay, this is the system that he's trying to expose, and this is why they're trying to take him down.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Political commentator Scotty Neal Hughes, thanks so much for making the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing this.